Welcome to the Homeschool High School podcast, brought to you by Seven Sisters Homeschool.com and the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. I'm Vicki, and I am here all on my own today to talk about how to get your teens interested in history. So you may have noticed sometimes teens like textbooks, but very often they don't love textbooks, especially history textbooks. So sometimes they can be a little bit dry. And so if you want to get teens interested in history, there's some different ways that you can kind of sparkle up history and make it more exciting for teens. So I want to share a few ideas that have worked for my kids over time. So one of my teens was really interested in history. And so he just made it happen on his own. And he could read a textbook, but he would just make all kinds of his own explorations. And that was really cool. But a lot of my other kids needed ways to spark their imagination. So we might have a syllabus or a textbook that we worked from, but then we would sparkle it up with some things that got them inspired. So let me share a few of those. So one is we did field trips. We were very, very blessed to be part of a co-op. And so we could go with our co-op and I didn't have to organize everything. But families can go on field trips, and there are a gazillion places wherever you live that have some kind of story behind them. And so if you have that, sorry, Seth, can you edit that out? So let me start all over. All right, let's start over at the beginning of field trips, right? All right, so the first thing you can do is take families on field trips. So our family was very blessed to be part of a co-op, so I didn't have to organize everything. However, if it's just your family homeschooling, a family field trip looks good on a portfolio, and you can log those hours to level up the history credit for your teens. But very often, seeing some real life hands-on history in their local area, or if you go on a family vacation, finding the historic sites or just the stories of a town or a place that you go to will help teens know like history's a real thing. Like real people were involved doing real things. There were real problems that needed to be solved. And that made history as real life to the people who lived it, but also helps it come alive for your teens. The next thing you can do is to give them movies to watch. So documentaries, historical fiction movies. So it's based on events, things that are famous people that take place in an era, just pure fiction from an era. And as the teens watch it, they get a sense of what it was happening in that era. And then you should also have some discussions about that movie, because sometimes it's just like a bunch of hooey, and you go like, okay, well, realistically, what was actually happening during that time period? What really were the fashions of that time period, or the problems of that time period? So they really can get a sense of building critical thinking skills, but also get some inspiration for history. And again, you can log those hours to level up their history credits, or just to build a history credit just by the Carnegie unit, it's just logging hours. And I'll put links in the show notes on how to do that, on leveling up or just logging hours for a credit. Another thing is give them books to read. So some teens love reading. Some really enjoy audiobooks. And so, it's really a good idea to give them biographies or books that are about a certain era, or historical fiction about a certain era. And then they can log those books as part of their book list for their language arts course, but they also can log it towards their history credit too. So we have found that that's a great way to level up a history credit also. But a lot of times for teens who are book readers or book listeners too, that getting the sense, the feelings of an era really help them to come alive history-wise. And they get so much more that is memorable about history from a book than reading the dates and facts in a textbook. All right, another thing you can do to make history come alive and get teens interested in it is get your family history. So every family has a history, and if you sit down and you see, you and the whole family tell the family stories and the family stories that you know of grandparents and great grandparents. If you've got grandparents around, get their stories and their memories. If you've got a family that does like ancestry.com, do some exploration there and like what kind of stories belong in our family. So I know like with the Tillmans, we can trace some of the colorful characters of the Tillman tree all the way back to the General Washington's aide to camp in the Revolutionary War was a Tillman. Then there was the Pitchfork Ben Tillman, who was a notorious member of Congress who could get violent on the floor. And so he's a kind of the embarrassment in the Tillman family tree, although a famous embarrassment. So there's all kind of family stories that build a teen's curiosity about the era. So when my kids were learning about the family and their relatives from the past, it kind of made some of the American history come alive. All right, another thing that you can do is to let teens do a little creative writing. So, or even research paper writing. So for teens who like to write, you can leverage that, and they can do research papers. I know one of my kids just really enjoyed research papers. And so he did a number of his on a history topic of his interest. And so he would log those hours towards history, leveling up his history credit, but it also counted as one of his papers for language arts. So you get, two for the price of one. For kids who have creative writing, they can take things that they have learned about history, what was going on in that era, and then, turn it into an angle, make their own historical fiction. Another way to get teens interested in history is to study current events, like follow current events, teach teens critical thinking skills, to be careful of their sources and to look at two sides of things and to think critically about that. And then to look at the historical context, like why do people today feel the way they do now? It's based on their experiences, the stories that were in their lives as they were growing up, what influenced the current events of now from the past. And so that's, there's nothing like understanding the context of a current event. And so teaching teens that skill, like let's dig back and find out, like in Ukraine, why are Russia and Ukraine at odds right now? What is the backstory there? It's not just this random current event that happened. And so every story that's going on now has a context. So if you teach them that, the critical thinking and digging into the history of the past, log those hours, they all count as history. Okay, and then the last one is get an interesting history textbook. So, all history textbooks aren't dry. A lot of them are. But I tell you, we have a favorite, and it's a favorite because our kids said so. And it's the Seven Sisters, History and Philosophy of the Western World. So my oldest son, Dr. Micah Tillman, is a philosopher, and he and I work together to follow the study of history's philosophies. So, and how the philosophies created some of the histories. And so the history influenced the philosophers. Philosophers really, really, really molded a lot of history. And that sounds like a dull, dry, serious textbook, but it's really very lighthearted and fun and pretty interactive. And so I really, my younger kids really enjoyed their Big Brother's textbook, but so did our peers. So they had kids in our co-op classes and our umbrella school classes, and then through Seven Sisters, and who have told us over time, they really got so much out of and really actually enjoyed reading and interacting with the textbook. So an interesting textbook helps. Okay, well, hopefully that is enough to get you guys started. Like, history does not have to be boring, drudgery, dates and facts all the time and nothing else. It can be really useful and meaningful and even fun. All right, so let's get them started and see if we can inspire maybe a few more historians in the world, or at least some present day critical thinkers who know how to interact with current events and the past well. All right, that's enough for today. So hey, if you haven't joined Seven Sisters Homeschool Facebook group, let's do that, because we have fun over there. You guys are all our seventh sisters. There's 6 of us, me and Sabrina and Kim and Marilyn and Allison and Sarah, but you are our 7th sisters, and that's how we got to be Seven Sisters Homeschool. And we talk a lot about what's meaningful to us right now. If someone has questions about high school, they'll throw the question up in the group. So it's a nice, gentle support system where it's safe to ask questions. Okay, so check us out there on Pinterest also, and Instagram, because we like to share all kinds of things and we have fun. All righty. And thanks also to Seth, who edits patiently these podcast episodes. All right, this has been the Homeschool High School Podcast, brought to you by Seven Sisters Homeschool.com and the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. We'll see you next week.